In November of 2023, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd J. Austin III and Indonesian Defense Minister Prabowo Subianto signed a historic defense cooperation agreement between the US and Indonesia. Now, Indonesia is part of ASEAN, as you have mentioned before, and is in a very, very strategic area in the South China Sea. Can you give us your assessment of how Indonesia is positioned? Is it able to resist US escalations in the region? And is there any significance to Xi Jinping skipping Indonesia in his last Southeast Asian visit?
So Indonesia is actually a very interesting case because in a way, Indonesia is very typical of Southeast Asian countries. And the Southeast Asian countries' motto is to be enemy of none and to be friends to all. They don't want to have to choose between United States and China. If you listen to the former Singaporean diplomat, Kishore Mubani, he has said again and again, we don't want to be forced to choose between United States and China. What he's really saying is if you keep on pushing us, we're going to have to choose China because Southeast Asia, their economic destiny is already tied to the rise of China. But at the same time, traditionally, Southeast Asian nations also wanted to use their kind of engagement with United States to play like a balancing game where, they will use US to balance China, but vice versa. But they are perfectly happy to do trade with both countries because both are very important markets to Southeast Asia. But ever since Hillary Clinton's pivot to Asia during Obama's term, United States have been pushing really hard for the Southeast Asian countries to choose. And these Southeast Asian countries have done their best to avoid to making that choice. They are trying to like really walking a very tight rope in the playing the balance between US and China. Their economic interest was tied with United States, but some of their security interests is tied with United States, particularly in case of Singapore. And Prabowo, for example, he traditionally have very close tie with United States because as a person from the Indonesian military traditionally had very close tie with United States throughout the Cold War. So this is what Indonesia is trying to do. It's trying to strike that balance between avoiding getting on US bad side, but continue economic engagement with China because right now, China is the largest foreign direct investor into Southeast Asia, Indonesia included. And, I'm in Bali. Right now, I'm talking to you over the 4G network built by Huawei. The electricity that I'm running right now is provided by a power plant that was built by China in north of Bali. And a lot of people in Indonesia, like my babysitter, they're able to afford smartphones. This is because China made smartphones affordable to everyone in the global south. And so in many ways, Indonesia's continued economic rise is tied with China's economy. The gravitation pull of Chinese economy is such that all of the Southeast Asia right now is being embedded into the Chinese supply chain. On the one hand, Indonesia just joined BRICS, right? They became a full-fledged member of BRICS because they want to have a seat at the table. They see BRICS as increasingly important alternative international forum to the traditionally Western dominated international organizations. Again, they don't want to be forced to choose. Keep in mind, China is not making any of them to choose. It's the United States that telling them you're either with us or against us. In fact, China very much would like them to keep their trade tie with the United States because this is where a lot of Chinese product still find their ways into United States. If you look at the trade figures of Vietnam, for example, their imports from China is way up. Their exports to United States is way up. You can just put two and two together to see what's really going on. So all the components and machineries are being shipped from China to Vietnam. and we're, for the final assembly so they can get stamp on made in Vietnam stamp and then get exported to United States for a lower tariff bracket. That's what's going on. And this is one of the reasons Trump initially slapped tariff against everybody across the globe because he was trying to stop that, but it's a fool's errand. And so I think Southeast Asian countries will continue this path, will continue to engage China economically, but politically try to stay on US good side. I mean, this is a very difficult balance act, especially when United States keep on pushing and pushing and forcing everybody to choose. This is why Kishore is telling Washington again and again, we don't want to choose, we want to choose. But what he's really saying is, look, if you force us to choose, you may not like who we choose.